What happens when you die? Brain death, brain stem death, contusion, TBI. Hello lovely YouTube family. Welcome back to Reality Binge. In today's videos, we're going to talk about what happens when you die. Before we start, I would like you to hit that red subscribe button so that you never miss out on any of our videos. No living human knows what happens once we die. But here's what we've gleaned from history and a few near-death survivors who said they glimpsed the opposite side. What happens once you die is probably one among the best mysteries on Earth, just because none folks know the solution and yet all folks will experience death eventually. Humankind's great thinkers are pondering this question for millennia. And in 1994, an orthopedic surgeon named Tony Secoria may have compared to solving this great mystery when he was struck by a nearly fatal bolt of lightning in upstate New York. Secoria felt himself fly backward, and therefore the next thing he remembered was turning around to ascertain his body lying on the bottom behind him. A world-renowned doctor has revealed to the planet what it's wished to die, and says the method is peaceful and pleasant. Dr. Sam Parnia, Director of Critical Care and Resuscitation Research at NYU Langone School of Drugs in NY City, said dying is very comfortable. And the doctor said people that have had an experience sometimes describe encounters with deceased relatives, but insist the feeling isn't evidence of the afterlife. Regarding the physical process, Dr. Parnia told a recent Oz Talk, "Death may be a process. It's not a black and white moment." He added, "The outcome is we've a deduction of oxygen that gets inside the brain once we are close to death, which causes our brain circuits to shut down and that we become unconscious to the surface world. When the gut stops, all life processes leave because there's no blood going to the brain, to the kidneys and liver, and that we become lifeless and motionless, and that is the time that doctors use to offer us a time of death." But the doctor, who has authored several studies and books on the topic of death, said there's a process which has left survivors of near-death experiences longing for death again. Dr. Parnia, who has brought thousands of patients back from the brink, said, "When we die, that isn't unpleasant for the overwhelming majority of individuals. For those folks who die naturally, albeit we were in pain before we die, the method of death becomes very comfortable. It's very blissful, peaceful. People describe a sensation of a bright, warm, welcoming light that pulls people towards it. They describe a sensation of experiencing their deceased relatives, almost as if they need come to welcome them. They often say that they don't want to return back to life. In many cases, it's so comfortable and it's sort of a magnet that pulls them that they don't want to come back. A lot of individuals describe a sensation of separating from themselves and watching doctors and nurses performing on them. However, Dr. Parnia says there are scientific explanations for these reactions and says seeing people isn't evidence of the afterlife, but more likely the brain just scanning itself as a survival technique. He said because of modern technology and science, death doesn't need to be limited to philosophy and religion, but it is often explored through science. The last thing to go. In the last hours, before an expected natural death, many of us enter a period of unresponsiveness, during which they do not answer their external environment. Anecdotal reports from near-death experiences commonly include stories of a dying person hearing unusual noises or hearing themselves pronounced dead. In a June 2020 groundbreaking study published in Scientific Reports, neuroscientists provided the primary empirical evidence that some people can still hear while in an unresponsive state hours before dying. Using EEG indices, neuroscientists at the University of British Columbia measured the electrical activity within the brain from hospice patients at St. John's Hospital once they were conscious and once they became unresponsive. A control group of young, healthy participants was also used. The researchers monitored brain responses to tones and found that the auditory systems of the dying patients responded similarly to the young, healthy control groups just hours from the end of life. They concluded that the dying brain responds to sound tones even during an unconscious state, where hearing is the last sense to travel within the dying process. The first thing to go. Many people who have had near-death experiences describe a way of awe or bliss and a reluctance to return back to their bodies after being revived. I interviewed brain scientist Dr. Jill Bolt-Taylor, who described having a strikingly similar awe experience during her stroke, which she detailed in her book My Stroke of Insight. Let's see how the people who have near-death experiences describe it as. The most glorious feeling. In 1994, orthopedic surgeon Tony Segoria called his mom from a paid phone during a lake house trip. They'd hung up, but he still had the phone in his hand when a blue flash came out. He hadn't realized there'd been a lightning storm brewing. He felt his body fly backward, and then, confusingly, forward. Segoria rotated to ascertain his own body lying on the bottom. "I'm dead," he thought. No grief, no ecstasy, just a fact, just love, unconditional love. After a 4-year battle with lymphatic cancer, Anita Mirjani slipped into a coma in 2006. Doctors were sure it had been the end, not realizing that in her near-death state, she still had consciousness. Initially, she felt like she was floating above her body with 360-degree peripheral vision of the space and beyond, she told Today. She couldn't see her late father himself, but she did feel his presence, and he had a message for her. He said that I've gone as far as I can, and if I'm going any more, I won't be able to turn back, she said. But I felt I didn't want to point it out because it had been so beautiful. I felt nothing but peace and happiness. About 20 years ago, orthopedic surgeon Mary C. Neal, MD, almost drowned while kayaking in Chile, and her heart stopped for quite half an hour. Soon after leaving my body, I want to be greeted by a gaggle of beings who were simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar. This may sound strange, but I felt nothing but peace and happiness in their company. She wrote on Mind Green. When I want to be separated from my physical body, I want to be simultaneously aware of what was happening in heaven and what was unfolding on the riverbank where I had drowned. I thought about my husband and my children, my parents and siblings, and not in the least about my work or other earthly worries. She went on to write down the book 7 Lessons from Heaven. What do you think? What will happen when we die? Let me know in the comments section. That's all for today. I hope you liked the video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so that you never miss any amazing video from us.